It is my pleasure to introduce Bir Khalsa. He's an assistant professor of medicine, Harvard Medical School, associate neuroscientist in the Division of Sleep and Circadian Disorders in the Department of Medicine and Neurology at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Bir Khalsa is a researcher in the field of body-mind medicine, specializing in yoga therapy, originally from Toronto. He earned his Ph.D. at the University of Toronto, where he also began practicing Kundalini Yoga under the tutelage of Yogi Bhajan. And he is an assistant professor at the Harvard Medical School. He is really a pioneer of Kundalini Yoga research, and he is a go-to person in the field. Anybody who is doing yoga is connected to Bir. He knows everybody and created the field over the years. Welcome, Dr. Khalsa.
Well, thank you, Helen, for that kind introduction and for the kind invitation to have me come and present to you at this conference. We've been fortunate, actually, in the Boston area to have a long tradition of integrative medicine courses and symposia. It's been going on for decades, and so it's just about time that UCLA joined the crowd, and congratulations to Helen. So my focus is really on yoga research. That's what I do, and that's what I live. And I've been practicing yoga since 1971 and doing yoga research full-time since 2000. But before we talk on yoga, I think, and I'm going to talk just about yoga, but also the application of yoga. I think before we start talking about it, we need some definitions, because a lot of different people practice different things when they talk about the word yoga. It's a small word, but it has a lot of derivatives and meanings. And so for me, this slide sort of summarizes sort of the basic definitions. I think the most obvious and most public view of what yoga is the physical postures and exercises, and you can see some of those here. They are indeed distinctly different from Western-type aerobic exercises. There's a lot of focus on flexibility, stretching, isometrics, and that is the most, as I say, public perception of what yoga is. And there are people who teach nothing but the postures. However, from a traditional perspective, yoga is much more than that. It is a multi-component practice, and that's the way most researchers view yoga, and that's the definition I'm going to use for yoga in this presentation. So another component of that is the breathing techniques, which have very specific characteristics, and I think Dr. Brown later today is going to really delve into the breathing type practices and the physiology behind those in much more depth. Another component is the deep relaxation techniques that are involved in yoga, particularly in yoga classes. And then finally, there's the meditation component. And this perhaps is, for many of us, the most important component of yoga practice. It is a contemplative practice. And many of us would actually argue that a lot of these physical components are there to support the meditative component of yoga practice. And by meditation, I'm defining as the control of attention in a relaxed, passive manner, regardless of whether that's in a formal meditation posture or whether it's meditation in action during yoga practices or during breathing practices. That's the key feature, is the control of attention. So this cartoon reads, in addition to 16 cup holders, it comes equipped with 4 dedicated yoga mat storage areas. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that yoga has become part of American culture. In fact, it's becoming part of human society as a whole across the globe. And we have statistics mostly in the US, but also some statistics from other countries. These statistics are from a recent survey that was conducted in the US, suggesting, and this came out in January of this year, suggesting that 36.7 million Americans are actively practicing yoga. And for those not practicing, the survey suggests that there's 83 million people who have some degree of interest in practicing yoga, taking up the practice of yoga. So not only is it significantly practiced in the public, that popularity is growing. And that's evidenced by the curve of previous statistics. You can see that in 2008 it went from 15 million to 20 million in 2012, and then jumped substantially, almost 100% to 36 million in 2016. And I point out that this is not just a linear trend, this is looking like an exponential trend. So this is growing very, very rapidly in society. And if you see those kinds of statistics, you would expect to see evidence in the culture, and we do. These are covers of prominent magazines. This caption here reads, "Dogs do it, kids do it, even desperate housewives do it." Why we've become a yoga nation, and that, of course, is Desperate Housewives actress Eva Longoria, and an older cover of Time magazine, Christy Turlington doing a posture I don't ever plan to do. And unfortunately, this is the face of yoga to much of the American public, and many of us in yoga therapy and yoga instruction have to disabuse people that this is what yoga is. Yeah, some people do this with yoga, but most do not. And so yoga is applicable to virtually every population. It can be adjusted and adapted. Yoga is very popular in the US. This is New York Times Square. June 21st, for the past number of years, they've had a celebration of yoga on New York Times Square. It's taken over all day long. This last year, 17,000 people registered to practice yoga on New York Times Square. So this is an international icon that's taken over by yoga practice. And this is the Prime Minister of India, who's a yoga practitioner. He addressed the United Nations in 2014. 3 points that he made in his address. One was that yoga is a holistic practice, incorporating not just body, but also mind and spirit. It's also very valuable in terms of the epidemic of lifestyle non-communicable diseases, which Dr. Hui referred to, and I'll talk about a little bit later. And then finally, he made a proposal for making an International Day of Yoga. And so accordingly, the United Nations adopted the Assembly in December of 2014 for International Day of Yoga. 177 countries signed on to that resolution. So it was very well received. And so accordingly, in 2015, on June 21st, there's Prime Minister Modi in New Delhi practicing yoga with a lot of people, but you don't get a sense of exactly how many until you see the aerial view. So this is 30,000 people practicing yoga on International Day of Yoga, and of course it was celebrated accordingly internationally. So this is the base of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France, and this is China. They're very organized in China. And it's become, as I say, a part of American culture. So now there are 5 airports in the US and counting which have yoga rooms designed specifically for yoga practice. And these are major airports: San Francisco, Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth. And anything that becomes popular in society, the advertising industry is well aware of. That's their job. And they view yoga as a positive health behavior, so they're selling products which have a negative connotation. So on the left-hand side is a vodka bottle doing a headstand on a yoga mat. And on the right-hand side, they're selling an over-the-counter sleeping pill with a yoga posture. And you know, you've hit the big time when even McDonald's is using you, and this was a few years ago. They had a DVD for yoga. And on the top left, I walked into a Connecticut rest stop to get a fruit and yogurt, and there on my fruit and yogurt cup was somebody doing a yoga practice. And this is occurred a few years ago, full-page ad in Newsweek magazine. The caption here reads, "I do yoga in my suite, doctor's orders," suggesting this idea of yoga not just as a sort of a health practice, but as a therapeutic intervention. Now, originally, yoga was never a medical system. It was a practice for contemplative growth and spiritual growth and inner development. However, the fact that yoga has this multi-component nature and improves psychophysiological functioning, it was used in the early 20th century in India for therapeutic purposes to help patient populations. And so we see the rise of yoga therapy in the 20th century. And it became so popular in India that in 1963, the Indian government commissioned the book you see on the left, Yogic Therapy, because of that popularity. And that has grown and come to the West as well. Now we have dozens and dozens of books on yoga therapy, including this one on the right, Yoga as Medicine. And it's not just books on yoga therapy in general, it's books on yoga therapy for specific conditions. So now there's books on yoga for insomnia, yoga for depression, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see the evidence of that in the culture, cover of Time magazine, how your mind can heal your body with a very clear, unmistakable image of yoga practice. Now, the CDC has been conducting surveys, including practices of alternative and integrative medicine. And so this is a chart from the 2007 survey. These are the top 10 practices, and among the top 10 are components of yoga and yoga itself: deep breathing, meditation, yoga, and progressive relaxation. And in the box on the right are the practices that showed the greatest increase between 2002 and 2007, and 3 of the 4 are yoga practices themselves. And so now we have the 2012 survey as well. And so from this NCCIH website, you can see the chart. So this is now the prevalence of yoga: 5% 2002, 6% 2007, a 50% jump to 9.5% in 2012. So we're over 10% of the population practicing yoga. And again, I point out that this is an exponential trend. So we may be at 15% pretty soon. That popularity in yoga therapy is reflected in an association I work closely with, the International Association of Yoga Therapists, which is the strongest advocate for yoga and yoga's benefits in the West. It's a very active association, over 4,000 members. These are largely people who are applying yoga for therapeutic populations. They're going through accreditation processes for self-regulating the quality of their work. They hold two conferences nationally, and they're really a resource for promoting yoga in modern medicine. This cartoon reads, "How is it we're the most successful species on the planet, yet we need to pay people to remind us to breathe and drink water?" And it's true. Mind-body medicine doesn't come to you immediately. You don't pop out of the womb practicing yoga. You have to be taught and learn these things in the same way that you have to be taught dental hygiene. You have to learn how to do a toothbrush. And I think the same is true for mind-body medicine. So now I want to turn to what we know about the psychophysiology of yoga, the science of yoga, and I think there's a lot to talk about here because the research has been very illustrative. This is a quote from my yoga master, yoga teacher, Yogi Bhajan, who said, "Yoga teaches you the techniques and awareness to stay healthy. You gain strong immune, glandular, and nervous systems. This foundation gives you energy and lets you deal with the mental and spiritual facets of your life." And this is really sort of a modern definition of yoga. It really is something that promotes health, both physical and mental, and allows you to function better as a human being. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about in terms of the mechanisms is also in this ebook, Your Brain on Yoga. And I'll point out something which is rather unique in this. This has the Harvard Medical School logo, the Harvard Medical School name, and the word yoga on the same cover. That's the reason I agreed to do this book. And I can tell you that 20 years ago, such a confluence would have been inconceivable. So this is also a testament to how yoga has really infiltrated our society. Also, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is now the body of literature is such that there are review papers that summarize what we know about the mechanisms of yoga practice. And so here are 3 papers of colleagues of mine who have put together papers that summarize some of the evidence that suggest exactly how yoga is working both physically and mentally. So going back and looking at the start of where yoga research was, one of the more significant early papers was this paper by Bakchin Wenger in 1957. These 2 investigators traveled to India, spent a year hunting down all these yoga masters and wiring them up with all of this electrophysiological recording equipment you see here. And their conclusion from this extensive study was that physiologically, yogic meditation represents deep relaxation of the autonomic nervous system. Now, this is a profound feature of yoga, and for that matter, mind-body practices, the concept that you can self-regulate internal state. You have some degree of control over your autonomic nervous system, as well as the other stress system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And these are the 2 main stress-controlling systems. Not only do you have control over the autonomic nervous system, but perhaps other systems as well. And so this idea of self-regulation brings self-efficacy into the picture, self-care, the potential that human beings have the capability of adjusting their internal mental and physiological state. And jumping forward to the current leading edge of research in yoga, there's 2 techniques that are really leading us to profound advances in the field. One of these is neuroimaging, especially fMRI and these kinds of brain imaging techniques. And a lot of these studies are comparing meditation and non-meditation in the scanner. So this is one of these types of studies where you can see that there's, these essentially images of the brain are very different in terms of brain activity in non-meditators compared to meditators. And not surprisingly, the changes that we see in brain areas is consistent with what we see behaviorally. In other words, the observed changes appear in structures that underlie the attention network, ergo meditation, and also those that relate to emotion and autonomic function, so that's self-regulation of the stress and emotion response. So it's really consistent. Now, for those of us who've been practicing yoga, this is like, duh. Of course it changes our brain activity. We experience changes. But to be able to image this and do it objectively is really what is carrying us forward in terms of representing this to modern science and modern medicine. It's not only brain activity that's changing. The brain is plastic. In other words, it exhibits plasticity. It can change its structure. So this is a study that was conducted at NIH, and on the left-hand graph is showing cold pain tolerance. And the black dots are long-term yoga practitioners, and the open circles are non-yoga practitioners, showing that yoga is associated with the ability to tolerate pain more effectively. And not only that, but the areas of the brain that are involved in pain regulation are structurally larger in long-term yoga practitioners. Not only that, but you can see on the right-hand chart the duration of yoga practice in years is directly correlated with the size of that area in the brain. So as you practice these mind-body practices, and yoga in particular, you change brain structure. You are developing a yogic brain, which essentially has better capabilities than people who don't practice. Another study looking at a different aspect is a study looking at fluid intelligence, a high-level brain executive activity that really makes us what we are as human beings. The ability to think abstractly, reason, identify patterns, solve problems, and discern relationships. And we know that the brain deteriorates like everything does in our bodies with aging. And here you can see fluid intelligence in the solid line deteriorating with age. And what you see in the dashed lines are two other curves from long-term meditators and long-term yoga practitioners. There's an anti-aging effect from these practices on the decline of cognitive functioning with aging. And this is associated directly with functional architecture. In other words, there's structural changes. So somehow these practices are maintaining a youthful brain as we age. Meditation isn't what you think. And of course, this is exactly what meditation is. You're either focusing your attention, and in meditation, you focus your attention on a target. That target can be a single point, a closed focus, so-called meditation. You're focusing on the breath, or a mantra, or a word, or a sound, or a visual object. Or you can be focusing your attention on the flow of sensation, or the flow of thought, or even the flow of motion of your body. In either case, you're focusing your attention. When you're not focusing your attention, what happens is your mind is wandering. And we're all familiar with mind wandering. It's what we do when we sit in the doctor's office or stand at the bus stop. And so interesting, not only are we studying what meditation does, we're actually starting to study what mind wandering does and is. So this is a study that was conducted at Harvard and published in our premier biomedical journal, Science. And what they concluded from this study of mind wandering is that people's minds wandered frequently, regardless of what they were doing. People were less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were not. So the conclusion was the ability to think about what is not happening is a cognitive achievement that comes at an emotional cost. And when you think about this, well, why would mind wandering be sort of negative in tone? Why would that be negative in terms of the content of emotion? Well, if you think about it a little bit, we are, as human beings, dependent upon, and as the top line of the species on the planet, we're dependent upon our executive cortex, our ability to think abstractly, to analyze the past, to predict the future. And of course, what we're doing when we're mind wandering is basically survival regulated. We're analyzing that fight we had with our spouse this morning when you're standing at the bus stop. You're wondering, is that bus going to make it on time? If it doesn't, where's a taxi? If I'm late from work, my boss is going to chew me out. I may lose my job. I got to maybe find another job, and so on and so forth. And when you look at the content of that, it's mostly negative in tone. Each one of those little things is generating an emotion response and a stress response. And if you do that 24/7, you can imagine that brain activity and brain plasticity is all going to work in developing a very strong emotional responsiveness. And what you do when you meditate is you go into a neutral space, you go into the neutral mind, you focus your attention, and mind wandering stops. So it's essentially a mind wandering holiday. And so research is now starting to show that the more people meditate, the less at risk they are for psychological mood disturbances and, in fact, psychological disorders. And so this is an interesting area because it's really starting to highlight what it means to focus attention in the act of meditation. And I like to show this study by Wendy Hassenkamp, who brought meditators into the brain scanner, asked them to meditate, and gave them an event marker. And they were instructed that when they first noticed their mind wandered, and the mind wanders during meditation, and the idea is that you bring it back. And you focus for a while, and then suddenly the mind wanders, you catch it, you bring it back. So there's two phases in meditation. You're alternating between focus and mind wandering. And with that event marker, they were able to scan the brain and show what the brain was doing in the focus phase during meditation, and you can see that at the top. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is largely activated in the focus phase during meditation. However, when the mind is wandering, another network of brain centers is activated, and it's called the default mode network, simply because that's what the brain is doing when there's no particular activity. The mind is wandering. So these are very discretely different activities in the brain. And in fact, in long-term meditators, you can actually see that the amygdala, the limbic system, actually gets smaller. So structurally, you have essentially a meditator's brain. You are less reactive to stress and emotions as you practice meditation or yoga over the long term. So this is really fascinating work that's really giving us an insight into how contemplative practices lead to better mental health. Another area which is at the cutting edge of research is molecular biological approaches, particularly genomic expression. And I show here Dr. Levetsky's work here at UCLA, but there's other published work looking at genomic expression. These practices make changes in gene expression. You can, of course, not change your DNA, but you can change which genes are active and which genes are downregulated. And so these studies are starting to show that we activate genes that are good for us, like reducing stress activation, and enhancing genes that are good for us, like improving immune function. So not only are these yoga and meditation practices changing our central nervous system activity, they're working at the cellular level across the body to make improvements in human functioning. And this is particularly important, of course, with people who are suffering from chronic stress, as it was shown in this particular study by Dr. Levetsky's team. Another molecular piece of evidence is telomerase, which is an enzyme that heals the ends of the chromosomes called the telomeres. And these telomeres deteriorate with chronic stress. And so Dr. Levetsky's team and a few other people have shown that, in fact, these practices can actually increase telomerase, which is healing these ends of these chromosomes, which is a very positive outcome. And again, all of this is working at the molecular level. So again, more objective evidence showing that this is not just a hobby. This is not just placebo effect, something you do on the weekend for fun. This is mind-body medicine. You're actually making real neurophysiological changes throughout your body when you do these practices. And one of the things that, of course, is central to the outcome of yoga and meditation practices is their ability to improve stress and emotion regulation. And it's really one of the big reasons why people come to yoga practice. So in this survey study that we published, looking at why people were taking a beginner's yoga program, one of the three reasons at the top of the list was stress management. And this is one of the big outcomes that we see in virtually all yoga research. It's very effective at reducing acute and chronic stress. And this same sample, the same group of individuals, we gave them the perceived stress scale to measure their perception of stress and how it was affecting their lives. And of course, we saw a statistically significant reduction in perceived stress in that population. Just to show you that this is really advanced substantially, there are now review papers showing that a large body of, quite a few studies are now showing that effectively yoga is effective at reducing stress, and when you add the meditation studies, it compounds this further. So it's pretty well established that these practices are very good at stress reduction. And just to give you a couple of examples of our research, This is work of Ned Hartfield in the UK, in Wales, and he went into a clerical population, a workforce, occupational setting. This happened to be National Health Service workers, surprisingly, in Wales. Did a randomized controlled trial of a yoga intervention for 8 weeks, and indeed, not surprisingly, they found that there was a nice statistically significant reduction in perceived stress, whereas the control group had no improvements. Another area that yoga is really known for historically is its ability to change state of consciousness. And we're talking about a deeper experience. We're talking about a sort of a transcendent state, a unitive experience of consciousness. So this is an internet survey that we did of long-term yoga practitioners, and what we correlated was experiences of transcendence and positive psychological attitudes and mental mastery with the amount of practice, the hours per week, total lifetime hours, and total calendar years. And most of these were statistically significant. There's a tight relationship between how much people were practicing yoga and how much of this transcendent experience people were experiencing. And there's not a lot of research on this aspect of yoga's effect on consciousness. It's very difficult to get this kind of work funded. But recently we were able to do a prospective study, and this was done with young professional musicians, young adults, at the Tanglewood Music Center in Massachusetts. And we did a control trial, and those students, those young adults who practiced yoga for 6 weeks, we measured a construct called flow. And flow is this deep, powerful experience that one gets into during an activity. There's a sense of timelessness, there's a sense of immersion, there's a sense of unitive. You can't distinguish between yourself and the activity, and it's a very profound and joyful experience. And in sports, people call it in the phrase of being in the zone. And this is a very powerful experience that many musicians already experience, but we were able to enhance this experience of flow using the dispositional flow scale. And so we had statistically significant improvements in the yoga group just after 6 weeks of practice, whereas those that did not were not able to show any improvements. And in the subscale in this questionnaire called autotelic experience, this is that unitive state, that deep, profound, oceanic sense of immersion. And we were able to show statistically significant improvements there. So this suggests that even over the short term, it is possible for people to witness this sort of change in deeper level of experience, which equates to essentially a change in spirituality and life meaning. So I like to summarize sort of all of the mechanisms that we know in terms of contributing to yoga's benefit in this logic model. So as I've said, yoga practices, as I'm defining them, is this multi-component practice: postures, breathing, relaxation, and meditation. Although having said that, a lot of people who adopt the yoga lifestyle go further than that. They do additional practices, they live in communities, they have a vegetarian diet, and so on. But these are the 4 basic ones that you see in most yoga research studies. And as I've mentioned, the most obvious outcome is the physical components, and we do have strong evidence that it does change flexibility, strength, coordination and balance, respiratory function. And Dr. Brown will be talking a lot about the respiratory function in terms of the mechanisms that we know that exist for that, 2 of them being that it improves respiratory efficiency substantially, and that also has profound effects on the autonomic nervous system, particularly with sympathetic activity and with heart rate variability. All of these physical changes lead to this increase in physical self-efficacy. I've talked about self-regulation, particularly emotion regulation and stress regulation, and these practices end up leading to a state of resilience to stress and equanimity in the face of strong emotions. And that leads to basically a mental and emotional self-efficacy. The other thing that happens largely through the meditative component of yoga practice is this increase in mind-body awareness. You spend more time in the attention networks in the brain, you become better at attending. And that leads to improvements in your ability to attend, but also improvements in mindfulness, in your ability to concentrate, which it really affects overall cognitive abilities, and ultimately metacognition, which is the ability to be aware of not only interoceptive states of what's going on inside the body, but also what's going on in the mind. And this is a skill that really does get enhanced with these contemplative practices. You do become more aware of what's going on mentally, emotionally, and physically. And then finally, the last component I alluded to was that there is increases in spirituality. Now, for most people, these come with a lot more time and practice. These will come after months and years of practice, but it's not uncommon to hear someone who's been practicing for a year coming up to you and saying, you know, yoga changed my life. It's really a profound change that people go through. It's a transformative change. People change their values, they change their perspective on life, and they change their behavior as a consequence of that. So there's this sense of transcendence. It's a unitive state, and it may be not a profound, long unitive state. It might be something just that occurs for a few milliseconds in the deep relaxation part of yoga practice, where you have this profound sense of peace and harmony. And that leads to more experiences of flow, this transformation, and ultimately something that's very important, especially in a society which is burdened with lifestyle disease, which is a sense of life meaning and purpose. And then in particular, this particular aspect of yoga practice can actually change lifestyle behaviors, which is really critical. Now, all of these things are not separate boxes. We do that because we are trying to pigeonhole to understand these things, but in mind-body medicine, nothing is separate. In mind-body medicine, we know that everything is interconnected, and so all of these boxes are interconnected with each other, and this sort of separating into boxes is artificial, but it helps us to understand it. But all of these skills and components lead to basically better global human functionality overall, and that includes physical and mental health, physical, mental, and emotional performance, positive behavior changes, increases in social responsibility, values, relationships, and then ultimately quality of life, life purpose and meaning, and even this word, spirituality, the S word. So we now have a choice in society. You can go to the health club and be one with yourself and clear your mind with yoga, or you can still continue to be oblivious and mindless with a TV and a treadmill. Your choice. So now I want to turn to a little bit about the yoga therapy research that's been going on. And in fact, yoga has been shown to be effective for disorders. In some way, that's not surprising. If yoga is very good at reducing stress, increasing self-regulation, those are very, very strong contributors to most disorders. So not surprising that yoga would have benefit. But this is a paper we just published last year, which is a review of all of the publications that have been done on yoga as a therapeutic intervention for patient populations. You can see that this is a fairly new field, with the first publications not appearing until the early 70s. But look what's happened over the past 10 years. This is an exponential, huge increase in the number of these publications. So just like the practice of yoga in the general population, yoga therapy research is undergoing this very dramatic increase. It's not just in quantity, but this orange curve here shows the randomized controlled trials that comprise these publications. And you can see, therefore, these are gold standard research methodology, and so that's also increasing exponentially. So it's not just the quantity, but also the quality of this research that's increasing. When you look at what the studies have been done, it virtually is in all of the disorders, particularly the three major disorders, cardiovascular, respiratory, and I haven't included it here, this is a mistake, but mental health disorders, those are the big three. And of course, those are the big three most important diseases in modern medicine. And then there's a variety of other topics that have particularly been addressed. And cancer's on there, not because yoga's the effort is to cure cancer, but it's to allow people to cope with the stress and emotion dysregulation that comes with a cancer diagnosis and all the side effects that come with cancer treatment. And yoga has been very effective in that area, and it's very hard to find a good cancer center that doesn't offer yoga classes. So the International Association of Yoga Therapists, this body of evidence has reached the point where that organization has been supporting a conference that I run called the Symposium on Yoga Research. We've held it now 5 times. The next one is happening at the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health in Western Massachusetts at the end of September. And this is a full-bore academic meeting that brings together all of the yoga researchers to collaborate and share and promote research moving forward. The body of evidence has also grown to the point where we're now in the process of publishing a book called The Principles and Practice of Yoga in Healthcare. It's being printed this month. I'm joined by several leading yoga researchers and yoga therapists as co-editors. And in fact, 3 speakers of this conference are chapter contributors to that book. We have 60 scientists, 60 yoga researchers internationally who are all leading researchers who have contributed to this book, and also included 30 yoga therapists who have contributed practical information. So we're hoping that this is a really landmark medical textbook that can move yoga therapy forward in the field of modern medicine. So moving to the topic of yoga specifically for this conference, which is mental health, obviously there have been a number of studies that show positive benefit on yoga for mental health. This is a review paper published about 3 years ago by a colleague from Duke University, and the middle author is Shirley Tellis, a very well-known yoga researcher, perhaps the most well-known yoga researcher. And this summarized the literature on yoga for mental health, showing indeed that there is positive benefit. And actually, when the author was interviewed on ABC News, he said that if yoga was a drug, it would be the most widely prescribed drug in the world, given the evidence that he saw for its efficacy in mental health conditions. So I think there's a lot of potential for yoga for mental health conditions. And just to share with you a couple of examples of research from my laboratory, we have a very preliminary study that was done in Vermont with a clinical psychologist who is using a Kundalini Yoga intervention for generalized anxiety disorder. And you can see reductions in anxiety, depression, and the Global Severity Index, which were statistically significant, and this manuscript's been submitted for publication. We've already published another paper by another colleague who is doing a mix of Kundalini Yoga together with cognitive behavioral therapy, a mixed intervention, and you can mix these things. It's not like mixing drugs. You can mix behavioral interventions without any side effects. And indeed, in that published study, we were able to show statistically significant reductions in both state and trait anxiety. And we use this pilot data to submit a grant to the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. We're 3 years into a 5-year multi-site study of yoga for generalized anxiety disorder that's being conducted at Massachusetts General Hospital and Boston University. And so we're looking forward to that study when the results come out. Another area which is getting a lot of attention with yoga and meditation practice, and I think Dick Brown and Pat Gerbar are going to spend a lot of time on this, is yoga for trauma. There's a lot of potential benefit here. The thing with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is that it's not just a mind disorder, it's a mind-body disorder. There's a lot of physical components to this disorder. And so it's been argued that the best way to treat a mind-body disorder is through the mind-body intervention. And currently, PTSD in conventional medicine is being treated strictly as a psychiatric condition. And in yoga practices, we add the breath, we add the body, we add movement. And I think there's a lot of potential for that to improve the efficacy of treatment for PTSD. So we did a study of yoga for post-traumatic stress disorder in veterans. This was funded by the Department of Defense. This was a single group trial. You can see in the top, we did show across all of the patients a trend for improving in the post-traumatic stress disorder, clinician-administered post-traumatic stress disorder scale. And when you look at the total CAPS score, this was statistically significant. And interestingly, when you look at the subscales, the one that showed the strongest statistical effect was hyperarousal. And again, this is yoga's ability to reduce sympathetic drive and the activation of the stress systems. Another study we did was in the civilian population. This was done by a graduate student at the University of Toronto and published just last year. And this showed nice changes. You can see pre-treatment, mid-treatment, and post-treatment. The yoga group here in the PTSD checklist self-report questionnaire shows a general decline over all 3 time points. The control group in this randomized controlled trial was unchanged. Not only that, but we showed improvements in resilience to stress, improvements in perceived stress, and using another stress measure as well. So there is a lot of potential for yoga for trauma. Another area that's been of my interest has been the application of these practices for insomnia. So this is a review paper summarizing all of the mind-body intervention studies that have been done on yoga, on mind-body treatments for insomnia, including yoga practice. And I can tell you that what we know about insomnia is it's basically not really a sleep disorder. It's really a disorder of hyperarousal. It's the activation of the stress systems that are chronically elevated. So if you're chronically aroused, if your sympathetic system is on 24/7, you're going to have difficulty sleeping. It's the same thing if you were to drink 8 cups of coffee a day, you would have difficulty sleeping because that's an arousing agent. So insomnia is really about, at least primary insomnia is really about hyperarousal. And yoga is very, very good at reducing hyperarousal. So we did both a single group trial and then followed that with a randomized control trial of a Kundalini yoga intervention for chronic insomnia. This was a 45-minute practice every day for 8 weeks. And here you can see the results on a number of different sleep measures. On the top left, the blue line is the yoga group showing reductions in sleep onset latency, the time taken to fall asleep, dropping fairly quickly. And this was largely a breathing meditation. So dropping fairly quickly, and then on the long-term follow-up, dropping even further. And it outperformed in green the control group, which is a low-active sleep hygiene control. On the bottom left is total wake time during the night, showing decreases, and then long-term follow-up maintained. And this was a 6-month long-term follow-up. Sleep efficiency is the percentage of time that you're asleep during the night, and that for insomnia patients is below 80%, and you can see that here, but then by the time they reach the end of the study, they're up close to 90%, which is really normative for sleep. And then total sleep time also increasing from less than 6.5 hours to 7.5 hours. Again, that's also normative. And one of the beauties of this particular thing is that in cognitive behavioral therapy approaches to chronic insomnia, they generally don't see a lot of improvement in total sleep time. So this is something that may be unique to yoga that provides additional benefit for these patients. This cartoon reads, okay, your posture's very good. Now relax, concentrate, and slowly let go of your cell phone. This is the first instruction in a yoga therapy session. And so now I want to turn to a topic that's of particular interest to me. And in my midlife crisis, I was asking myself, where's the biggest bang for the buck in yoga? And I don't think there's a better marriage than the one between mind-body medicine and preventive medicine. Why should we wait for people to get hypertension and cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes and obesity when they're 50 and 60? We should be preventing this because these strategies are very effective for doing that. And Dr. Hui mentioned the current epidemic of what we call non-communicable diseases. These are preventable lifestyle diseases. They're the leading cause of death in the world. They're in high-income countries, big time. They're all over the world. And they are projected to increase substantially. This is the biggest challenge we face in modern medicine. This is why the healthcare system is under difficulty, because of the treatment of these preventable lifestyle diseases. And so this is a major, major health burden. And the risk factors for these are basically aberrant lifestyles: lack of physical activity, poor diet, poor lifestyle choices. And I believe there's 3 factors that contribute to this that I think yoga particularly is good at. One of these is chronic stress. We are a society that does not have any strategies to cope with with chronic stress, and our society has plenty of chronic stress, which I think you all know. The other thing is that generally we are pretty numb as modern society. We have very low mind-body awareness. We're not aware of even what we're thinking, not aware of what we're feeling. And when you actually practice these techniques to enhance your attention on interoceptive changes and onto what's going on mentally and emotionally, you become more aware. You become able to make choices because you're finally aware of what's going on. And I think that's critical. That's something that yoga and contemplative practices can provide. And then finally, as a society, we are pretty materialistic. It's still a rat race out there. The goal is to become more wealthy, more powerful, and have that 2-car garage. And those are very materialistic goals. I like getting a 2-car garage, but the problem is if that's all of your goals in life, you're going to be unhappy, and you're not going to have a sense of life meaning and purpose. And unfortunately, many of society have very limited goals, and so the worldview is very, very challenged. And I think through this aspect of yoga, the contemplative nature of it, it can get people into a deeper sense of life meaning and purpose. So these are 3 areas that I think that are critical. There is evidence that long-term yoga practitioners do have mental health. These are studies of Alison Ross at NIH showing that in terms of mental health, almost twice as many people who practice yoga long-term report themselves as flourishing mentally compared to the general population. In another study, it's not just they're reporting that they're better health, they're actually attributing that better health to the yoga practice. So in terms of the percentage of long-term yoga practitioners that agree or strongly disagree with this statement, they say my health is improved because of yoga, 90% agree to that statement. In terms of I am happier because of yoga, 86% agree with that statement. So they attribute their improved health to the yoga practice. We did an internet survey study of long-term yoga practitioners and found a direct correlation between medication use and years of yoga practice. So people that don't practice yoga at all have the highest medication use, and that goes down the more years that they've been practicing. Not only that, but the correlations are strongest with those drugs that are treating preventable lifestyle disease. So you see high statistical significance for drugs for depression or diabetes, for high blood pressure, and for high cholesterol and inflammation or arthritis. So it's actually these lifestyle diseases that are being presumably best addressed with yoga practices. So where's the best place to practice mind-body medicine and yoga practices? This survey study is a study of mental health problems in the US. The conclusion was that majority of seriously impairing and persistent conditions have child-adolescent onsets and high comorbidity. In other words, the bulk of mental health problems in adulthood actually starts in childhood and adolescence. So where should we be targeting? We should be targeting childhood and adolescence. And in fact, this paper even alludes to that, saying that there's a need for treatment of largely untreated child-adolescent disorders. And that is very disturbingly highlighted in this longitudinal study. They followed children from age 9 to 21, looking at the cumulative prevalence of an occurrence of a DSM-4 condition for mental health. The cumulative prevalence exceeds 80%, suggesting that the experience of psychiatric illness is nearly universal in our adolescents and children. So there's a huge problem going on in our adolescents and children that most of us are completely unaware of. But you only need to talk to a principal or a school teacher to find out that indeed they are under a huge burden. Not only are their kids suffering, they are suffering from mental health problems. So this is a huge problem that needs to be addressed. Not only can we address that, but we can basically practice preventive medicine to give these young people a strategy to cope with life more effectively. So accordingly, my lab has been strong in moving forward in this direction. We've published a number of papers. The top paper here is a rationale paper for why we should be implementing yoga in the public school setting as a strategy for educating the whole child. We shouldn't just be educating kids to get a job. We should be educating them how to be effective and functioning human beings in society. That means educating the whole child. And we've also published a review looking at the number of papers. This is a field that's in its infancy. There's only about 50 papers now published in the field of yoga in schools, but that is growing. So we ourselves have published a couple of trials of yoga in the public school setting. This is an infant field. We're having trouble getting funding. We're having trouble getting positive results, but the results that we have had are interesting. And so we conducted a 12-week-long studies in a single semester in schools in Western Massachusetts. These were randomized controlled trials. We did both self-report quantitative questionnaires and qualitative interviews. And some of the outcome measures that we see in the self-reports are shown here illustratively. So everything going to the right is improvement, and the pink is the yoga. So you can see in a number of these mental health outcomes, there's not much movement, maybe anger and resilience moving, but those error bars are large. Those were not significant. So there's not much improvement that we're seeing in the yoga group. But this was a randomized controlled trial. Look what happened to the kids who were just practicing their regular phys ed instead of having that replaced with yoga. There's a deterioration over the course of a single semester. We're actually seeing this deterioration in mental health happening in these adolescents throughout the course of a semester. And so what yoga is doing is basically acting as preventive medicine to prevent that decline in mental health. Although our prediction would be that if we were able to give yoga from kindergarten to grade 12, we would actually see improvements in these measures compared to the control group. And our dream study is a longitudinal study to follow kids like that into adulthood, to demonstrate that they would have less of a mental health and physical health burden. Not only that, but they'd be better functioning human beings in society with higher quality of life, etc. We were also funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse for a small study looking at risk factors for substance use. And one of the risk factors that we showed change was the willingness to smoke cigarettes. So at baseline in this randomized controlled trial, they were both the same, but by the end of treatment, the control group had increased their willingness to smoke cigarettes, whereas the yoga group showed no change. So again, yoga is acting as preventive medicine. And there's no better place, there's no better way to convey this than in the words of the students themselves. So we've conducted qualitative interviews with some of these students to address, what they're experiencing, and I've provided you with quotes here from these three areas that I think yoga is very good at: stress, awareness, and worldview. So one student said, "I use breathing outside the classroom in my life to calm me down. If I was stressed or angry, I would then do the breathing to calm me down, and I will probably continue to do this. I was less anxious about school in general." They learned this breathing in the first yoga class, and then the next day they're practicing it at home. They're teaching their parents how to do it. They're doing it before a soccer match. They're doing it before tests. It's a life skill that they now have for the rest of their lives. And it's so simple and so easy to do that, and it gives them something that really could potentially prevent future disorders in mental health. Another student said, "I learned how to pay attention to how my body feels." Now, if you're a yoga teacher, you know that this is precious. This is exactly what you're trying to teach. You're trying to teach this increase in mind-body awareness. And the beauty of that is that you have to be aware of what's going on mentally and physically in order to make a lifestyle change, to address that negative feeling. And this is a response, this generates a response in this improvement in mind-body awareness to avoid negative behaviors because you feel negative from them, and go into positive behaviors because you feel better from them. And the example of that is in this quote here: "I have been eating healthier, more fruits and vegetables, and not a lot of junk food, for example, ice cream and candy." And we didn't give them any nutrition recommendations. This is coming out of this increase in mind-body awareness. And the same thing will happen with physical activity. They'll get into physical activity, they'll feel better from it, and they'll gravitate towards it. So this is really at the core of treating lifestyle disease, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. Another student said, "I've been a lot more happier lately. I feel like a better person, making better choices and staying out of trouble." So this is life perspective. This is their approach. This is their executive mind coming into play as an adult. My favorite quote is the next one. "My friends would complain before and after class, so there was a lot of peer pressure to not like yoga, but it made me more calm. I like it, but a bunch of my friends are peer pressuring and stuff. They are like, yoga sucks and all that stuff. I'm like, oh, I feel relaxed. And they are like, dude, how can you feel relaxed?" And you have to understand that in a school setting with passive informed consent, these kids are assigned to the yoga intervention and they do it. And they're bitching and moaning, "This is for girls, I don't want to do this crap." And a month later, they're defending it to their peers as something that's useful. So that's the beauty of mind-body medicine. It's not dependent upon belief. You can believe that it doesn't work, you practice it, it still works, because these are mind-body practices. And that's the beauty of these techniques. And then finally, we've done this particular intervention in one school for a number of years, so a lot of students in the school have gotten the yoga intervention. And we did a focus group with the school administration, and the school counselor was quoted as saying, "Yoga has made a huge impact on our school. It is making our school a better place." So here's the real bottom line. As you change the individual, improve the individual, you improve the class. As you improve the class, you improve the grade. As you improve the grade, you improve the school. As you improve the school, you improve the district, and you know where it's going. So this is a possibility for really making a change in society as a whole. And I think that's why yoga is growing in popularity. People are voting with their feet. This is word of mouth. People are sharing that this is making my life better, and so they're gravitating towards it. So I want to acknowledge all of the volunteers and colleagues who've contributed to this. A lot of these studies are pilot studies. People have donated their time because this is difficult to get funded and we need to get pilot data. So there's a lot of colleagues that have helped with all of the studies that we've conducted in my lab over the past 15 years. I'm also indebted deeply to the NCCIH, which if it were not for the funding of this organization that began in 2000, I would not be here today. I'm also indebted to the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, which is the largest yoga center in the United States, and they have a strong mission of supporting research on yoga. And in fact, they funded most of my yoga in schools research studies. I'm also indebted to the National Institute on Drug Abuse for that one study, and also to the Kundalini Research Institute, which supports my work in yoga research. And I want to end with this slide here. And this is bringing us back to the epidemic of lifestyle disease. And believe me, it's not just Americans. China, India, and US are number 1, 2, and 3 in type 2 diabetes. So this is an epidemic that's worldwide. And the problem is that we don't have the skills in our schools or in our medical system to provide the ability to improve all these facets of life, to manage stress, to manage emotions, to maintain mind-body awareness, to come to a proper worldview, to experience what it is to have a high quality of life and deeper sense of meaning. And I think through the research, and that's what my goal is, to promote this and conduct this research, we can then provide the evidence base that's necessary for policymakers to implement yoga in the public schools and into the medical system. And if that happens, hopefully in the next few decades, we can change from this particular cartoon to this one here. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Dr. Khalsa? Yes, over there.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question and I would like to make a comment. My first question is, why Kundalini practitioners use turban, gender names, and no authentic, in my opinion?
I didn't understand.
Why the Kundalini practitioners use turbans and dress in the manner that you do?
I see. Okay, I got
I'm
it.
curious about.
So Yogi Bhajan was a Sikh as well as a yoga master. And so many of us in the 70s and 80s who became students of his not only adopted yoga practices and became yoga teachers, many of us also became Sikhs, which is a religious lifestyle which has a lot of yogic practices involved with it. But the two are really independent. Our current organization has many, many Kundalini yoga teachers who are not Sikhs. So it's a separate component.
Thank you so much for that.
certified Kundalini yoga.
Okay.
She doesn't look like me.
No attire.
Okay, and the second thing I would like to make a comment, because yoga has been giving because women's practices, and we have to point out that the yoginis is a community with money. I live in Mississippi, one of the poorest states in the United States, and the populations that practices yoga has money. And yoga is not the only mind-body practices. And I'm going to tell you, I practiced yoga for 24 years, and I quit. I don't want to be part of this community. Community is not doing the kind of work that I would like to see. Seeing a better world, I don't think so. It's creating the kind of revolutions and the kind of changes that can sustain life. And there are other practices like Tai Chi, Qigong, Aikido, which is amazing, and are better than yoga.
I respectfully disagree.
And I respectfully disagree with you.
I am actually also a Kundalini yoga instructor and a rheumatologist. Kundalini yoga changed my life for sure a couple years ago. But I wanted to know how, with the current model of medicine, like we can actually maybe bring yoga therapy and still be able to get reimbursed by insurance,
Right. So the answer is research. And the only the strong example that I can give you is the work of Dean Ornish, an integral yoga practitioner and student of Swami Satchidananda. And he conducted some very intensive lifestyle programs for heart disease patients. Included not only yoga practice, but also a vegan diet, a lot of support group stuff as well. And what he showed in those studies was the remarkable thing that's never been shown with any other therapy of the ability to reverse heart disease. And through the strength of that work, and not insignificantly due to his lobbying, and he's a very strong lobbyist in modern medicine for integrative medicine, Medicare 3 years ago now, approved his program for reversing heart disease as reimbursement for Medicare. So that's the example of how this is going to change. As we build up the pyramid of evidence, the healthcare companies are going to start to see a lot more cost-effective to spend $5,000 to train an adolescent how to practice yoga than it is to spend $100,000 to do a quadruple bypass when they're 35. The numbers are going to speak for that, and there are cost-effectiveness studies that are starting to be done, and we need to do a lot more. And those kinds of efficacy studies and cost-effectiveness studies is what eventually is going to make the difference. So it's really in the research.
Some of the psychotherapies contain mindfulness component, like dialectical behavioral therapy, and psychologists who are trained in mindfulness or yoga therapy would integrate it and be able to bill for it.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elena, and I wanted to ask you a question, but after some comments here, I really need to share some information with the group. I'm a certified nurse midwife. I've delivered up to 5,000 babies. I'm a certified yoga teacher, and I've been practicing yoga since I was 16. I mean, I know that this is not scientific. I know this is anecdotal, but I will say in every aspect of my career delivering those babies, yoga has improved the outcome. Without a doubt, I have been in medical emergencies where I have saved people's lives, uterine ruptures, shoulder dystocias, hemorrhages, and it is the mindset that I get from my yoga practice that keeps me calm, cool, collected. And the mother has said to me days later, I had no idea. You were so calm. I felt like everything was under control. My colleagues feel it when they work with me, and I feel it every day. I need to say that. We all have different ways for mind-body connection, but it is irrefutable that yoga helps many people on many levels. My question, original question to you is, you know, as a certified nurse midwife who works for a big HMO, oftentimes I'm only allowed like 20 minutes with my patients. When they're on the exam table, before I do an exam, I have them put a hand on their belly, a hand on their heart center, and breathe into their hands. Do you recommend, is there any breathing technique that you could give me in the short period of time I have working with my patients to help them cope with physical and emotional challenge, especially nowadays? So many women I have seen in the last 30 years have dealt with some kind of PTSD sexually, and it's really important to obtain their confidence and to help them cope with these problems. Thank you very much, and I thought your lecture was excellent.
Thank you. So the evidence is really starting to verify your experience, because there are a number of studies looking at yoga for pregnancy, showing that indeed the labor is less painful, there's fewer complications, fewer cesareans, child birth weight is higher. Virtually all of the outcomes in pregnancy and the child itself are improving with yoga practice. That's what the preliminary studies are starting to show. And in fact, this whole idea of using yoga actually in the hospital setting, not only for birth, but also for the surgical procedures, there's now a growing body of evidence that that is showing a lot of benefit. A colleague of mine, Elvira Lang, has used sort of a hypnotic guided imagery induction, showing that not only can they reduce pain substantially in sort of temporary quick procedures, but they can also improve outcomes, reduce the hospital length of stay, et cetera, et cetera. So this is valuable not just for the patients, but also for the healthcare practitioners themselves who are experiencing a substantial amount of burnout and compassion fatigue. And these practices are ideal for that population. So there are a number of studies looking at yoga for medical students, yoga for nurses, showing high positive benefits for these individuals. And of course, that's going to make them better care providers as well. So I think that's all consistent.
Okay. 2 more questions, because we're behind schedule.
Hi, I'm Beth Abrams. I work at the VA Medical Center in Albany, New York, and what I do there is attempting to bring alternative approaches to healing for that population. And I'm also a child psychiatrist. So I just wanted to respond directly about this question about labor and delivery, particularly. The practice that Dr. Brown's going to talk about and Dr. Gerbach today will actually be probably very useful for that specific kind of situations. And I have taught pregnant veterans who have severe PTSD and MST histories using these techniques to get through many of the aspects of their pregnancy, their births, and postpartum situations. So I think there's a lot of information still coming today.
Yeah, and the VA is remarkable in that it is including mind-body practices in its facilities more than conventional medicine institutions are. It's really remarkable in how open the VA has been. Yoga is being taught all over the VAs, and research as well. And in answer to that question, yes, I think breathing is a technique that is learned very quickly. It's one of the things that people who start to practice yoga take home immediately. And the simplest and most important breathing technique is the long, slow, deep breathing, which involves moving the abdomen out as you inhale, and then combine that with mental focus on the breath. That technique, simple, slow breathing down to 6 to 4 breaths per minute with mental focus on the breath, is so simple to learn and really has enormous, powerful effects. So in terms of answer to the previous question, that's something that can really make a difference in the short term.
Segmented breaths, just to add on this, I work with elderly people. They can't breathe slowly. It's sometimes very strenuous for them. I start with 3 seconds inhale, 3 seconds hold, 3 seconds exhale, 3 seconds hold, and then increase it up to 5 seconds. And that lowers blood pressure and heart rate by 10 to 20 points. And reduces anxiety. That's kind of, this kind of breath, segmented breath, has been studied. Okay, we have, last question.
I just want to express gratitude for all of you in this room and all the research that's been done. My name is Dr. Denise McDermott. I am a UCLA trained child psychiatrist. We have 1.9 billion children in the world right now, age 0 to 15. And we know now with the U.S. News and World Report that just came out that there's a 200% increase in suicidality in the age 10 to 14 age group for children. I find it interesting, one, that that's also in parallel process of when the internet came around. And I just want you all to know, I was trained at the time when it was all brain, 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 but I decided, and I respect you for all being in academics, to go into private practice. I'm here in the South Bay in Manhattan Beach. I'm proud to say that where I am fortunate to practice, they have the program Mind Up happening in the schools. Mm-hmm. My son in kindergarten this year is being taught about the amygdala, and my goal is to always prescribe the least amount of medicines and integrate a biopsychosocial with a spiritual mind-body. And you're right, I appreciate you for all the hours you've done that have not been covered, and I'm so passionate about this. I'm gonna push the envelope in the world I'm in with private practice and adjunct with you that there's also all these children on the internet. So I love your launching of the YouTube channel. So education and integration, I prescribe yoga every day. If people have not been doing their exercise and their yoga, I will not increase their meds. And I do it in a very kind way. I'm a very maternal doctor, but they know. And I just wanted you to know I'm so passionate about this because I have 3 very active children, so I really walk the walk at home. So I just want you all to know that I have actually hired a publicist, a YouTube channel, a blog, because we need to get the word out. This is actually a mental health care crisis. And we also need to change the way people think about going to see a psychiatrist, because not all of us want to just prescribe meds. It's the last thing I want to do. And I always prescribe exercise and yoga and good nutrition. So thank you all, and let's all pass the torch and motivate and inspire each other today. Thank you.
On this positive note, let's take a break, 5 to 7 minutes break.